Yeah. I mean, I completely so on the point that there are a lot of people on the left in the media who, whatever Trump does or whatever any Republican do, will respond by demonization. That's clearly true. I mean, any Republican president would go through the same. And I kind of, I accept that almost as background noise. I mean, the left's going to hate a Republican. That's just a fact. What concerns me slightly more is when elements of the conservative media join in. So when publications like National Review start raising serious questions, as they did ahead of the 2016 election, that for me raises more alarm bells. So, I mean, for example, we talk about the Korean example specifically, and I think it's a really interesting example because Trump did a lot. I mean, he went out of his way to meet Kim Jong-un. He had a more favorable and friendly relationship with the North Korea than any previous American president. I just don't see what he's achieved out of this other than giving North Korea a massive propaganda win. I mean, he's made Kim Jong-un look like a kind of serious world statesman rather than a mass murdering psychopath, which is what he is. And I don't see what he's gained. So, I mean, you're right that they stopped testing their missiles. They still have nukes. And they can still deploy them if they wanted to. I mean, they may have slightly slowed down the time they can take them to reach the western seaboard of the US. But I just don't see the fundamental wins. I see a lot of concessions coming from Trump. And I just think that's weakening the Western world, weakening the Western alliance. I mean, I thought it was really interesting what you said about neocons, because I think there's a kind of view that conservatism is almost in two camps. There's kind of the nationalist camp and the neocon camp. So the neocon camp is George Bush, invasion of Iraq, etc. And the nationalist camp is Trump, relative isolationism. I think that's a bit simplistic. I mean, I think there's clearly some truth to it. I think going back to Reagan, that's kind of my ideal Republican president. A president who stands up for democracy, for freedom, for American values abroad, including where necessary with the use of military force, and who promotes democracy and liberty and capitalism, free markets, all the things we all love, but who knows that there's a line in terms of interfering in the internal politics of other countries. So, I mean, Reagan won or played a very big role in winning the Cold War. I mean, his legacy, to some extent, was the destruction of the USSR, one of the most kind of ghastly authoritarian states in human history. I don't see what Trump's legacy is to match that. All I see so far is that he's kind of made some semi-friendly relationships with some tyrants, which is totally understandable, but I don't see what he's got in return. I don't see what the payback is. And that's what concerns me.
Fair enough. I would say that it's a little premature to judge Trump's legacy because he still has 5 years to go. We don't know what's going to happen. Like I said, if any other president you can name had made any kind of progress with North Korea, not only would it not be called, normalizing a brutal dictator, they would be getting the Nobel Peace Prize. The fact of the matter is, if Barack Obama did what Donald Trump has done with North Korea, brokering peace, by the way, everyone forgets the fact that North Korea and South Korea are cordial now. They're shaking hands. They're meeting, right? That is good for the world. That shouldn't even be a partisan divide. And yet somehow it is because of the president, because of what I like to call, and I'm not saying you have this, but what I call in the United States, Trump derangement syndrome. People are so blinded by their visceral hatred for this president that they can overlook anything that makes sense. It makes sense that North and South Korea aren't at each other's throats. It makes sense for anybody to broker peace in the world. Aren't we looking for a peaceful globe? But it seems to me because people hate Trump, they just look for anything to criticize. Like I said, if he cured cancer, they would find a way to politicize it and say, well, this is wrong. This is overreach of executive power. They would say whatever they could just to paint it in a bad light, which I think is very dangerous. When you think about, when we look back on history, the youth are going to look at something that was really good and see it as bad, even though we're living it right now. And whether or not you like Trump, it's actually a good thing that we're trying a different approach with Kim Jong-un, with Vladimir Putin. And oh, by the way, we can't forget about the fact that no one ever wants to talk about China and their violation of human rights, albeit it's not a dictatorship, right? It kind of is. It's a communist Chinese dictatorship. But why do we ignore that? Why do we ignore it? Is it because China's beliefs are more aligned with the political left, even though they won't admit it because China's communist? They won't admit it, but they are more aligned, where it's a totalitarian nanny state, all just total government control and regulation of all industries. That's what China is. And then their human rights violations, but no one wants to talk about that. It's always just here's how we can look at Trump. Trump, like I said, is the necessary change agent. He's like the wrecking ball that has taken out the political establishment, and now they're scrambling. So what we're seeing now is the true colors, the true nature of what the mainstream, both parties, by the way, right? I don't see this as a Democrat, Republican, or even liberal conservative. I try to even move away from that. I see it as the establishment, the globalists, the people who do not have the United States' best interests versus Trump, who is nationalistic minded, which I think a lot of people are behind that. A lot of people want that. Every country should put its own interests first. It's not about being isolationist. It's about, whoa, sometimes you need to pull back the other way. Like there was a time in the United States where we needed more liberalism. We needed progression, right? Yeah. And we got that. Now it's gone too far to the left and we need to pull back. Right now, the United States needs to be conservative.
Okay, did you bring up?
Sorry, I thought you asked a really interesting. I'll very quickly about it. I thought you asked a really, really interesting question about this, particularly on Korea. I don't want to get too hung up on Korea, but I thought it was a really interesting point. When you asked what was happening if Obama had done what Trump had done, and I agree, there would be people on the left who would say he's doing a great job. He's reaching out to our enemies. He's making peace. And obviously Obama got a Nobel Peace Prize for doing basically nothing, which was one of the most ridiculous awards in human history. But I think it's also worth looking at the other side. I think if Obama had done what Trump had done with Korea, remembering North Korea was a communist dictatorship, I think the Republicans, the right, would have absolutely crucified him. If Obama talked about becoming falling in love with Kim Jong-un, this dictator who's murdered thousands and thousands of people, who runs a kind of communist dictatorship, I think the Republican Party would have rightly gone absolutely bananas. But I think it works both ways. I think there were people on both sides who only attack the opposing side and kind of give their own side too much cover, too much friendship. The other kind of semi-related point is, I agree that Trump's foreign policy, he's reached out a lot to North Korea and to Russia, but it's quite sporadic. It seems quite a scattergun. So, for example, whilst he's reached out to those, for Iran, he's taken a very hostile approach. So, whereas the Iranian problem was it was still a massive problem, but it was semi-contained when Trump came to power, but by pulling out of the nuclear deal, that whole thing has been reopened. So it seems to me that on some countries, Trump's being really aggressive, almost too aggressive. And on some, he's being too soft. And I don't see the logic in his positions. It seems very sort of make it up as you go along. That would be my kind of fundamental critique.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And, I got to admit, that is not in my wheelhouse to really know everything going. There's so many moving parts, you know what I mean? Especially when you're talking about like the Middle East and Israel and all those conflicts and all that stuff, and all those proxy wars. I think there's a lot there that we still have to uncover, which I think that could be a whole different stream, like who's funding both sides of the wars and the military industrial complex and all that stuff, which, by the way, Trump has called out directly. He has said the military industrial complex. I like his entire stance as far as not wanting to interfere in other countries' affairs. I think that is the popular American opinion, even if you're talking about the political left. But as it relates to the politicians on both the left and the right, yeah, they have their opinions. The difference is the left has the media. The media has so much power. I would argue that the media has more power than the government because they can shape public opinion. They craft narratives. They're the ones who broker information to us, essentially, right? They're not supposed to be partisan, but they absolutely are partisan. Whereas, yeah, if Republicans had criticized Obama, it'd be like, okay, is that going to be cemented? Is that going to be in academia? Is that going to be in textbooks, what the Republicans thought of what Obama did? Which is, again, going back to how we need conservatism to pull back against the left. They should have no control, like just straight up monolithic control over academia. That's the biggest problem because the public school system is essentially a factory farm for a mind. You can create a mind in K through 12, right? Going back to, was it Stalin or Karl Marx? I forget who it was. Somebody from the KGB Soviet area, they were talking about how it only takes about 20 years to destroy a country from within. And you start with how you introduce propaganda and you change education. And so because the left controls that, they're able to change so there's more power within the culture than there is at the political level, if that makes any sense. And how that kind of relates to like the wars and stuff going on in the Middle East. Yeah, Trump is weird with certain countries. Yeah, I guess he has an unorthodox approach. I don't have much to compare it to other than Obama with what he did, with what Hillary Clinton would do, and with what George Bush did, and yeah, he could probably figure out some other things, but like bringing troops home from Syria, I like that. I don't understand funding, selling weapons to Saudi Arabia. Like there's a lot of weird things there, but I don't think Trump is solely pulling the strings, which is why John Bolton had to walk. We got to figure out what's going on with Mike Pompeo. That's pretty much the gist of what I know about, geopolitics.